Welcome to the Rangers Roost. This is a weekly stream where we get together. Hang on one sec. We got some alerts from Discord. Quite a few, in fact. There we go. We're in business. Welcome to the Rangers Roost. This is a weekly podcast where we sit down and talk about gaming and movies and entertainment and screenwriting and game development and just in general the things that affect us as a community and the things that interest us. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and it seems like a really good time to me for us to have a conversation about the difference between, and this is going to affect absolutely, frankly, everything in the media. If you are in any way involved in consuming or producing media, I think this is probably an important conversation to have, which is the difference between creating representation and appropriating culture that doesn't belong to us. And typically, white male um, content creators of any stripe will respond to these kinds of questions in one of two ways. Either they'll throw their hands up and say, well, you want it, you don't, you want representation, but you don't want me to get involved, so, you know, it's too hard. I'm not doing it. And the other sort of side of that conversation is to say, well, who who owns a story, not you. And to just move forward with whatever um, storytelling they believe is going to make them more successful or make them look good to whoever they're trying to look good to, and sort of barrel over any objections that the communities who might be affected by their work are putting forth. And that's not, putting aside whether or not that's even healthy or good for the media, I want to point out that it's not how we create lasting legacies as creators in entertainment. It's not an effective way to move forward with our careers. So, whether or not we want to, I think it's very fruitful to invest the time and attention that it takes to understand the boundary between creating representation and appropriating culture. At the very least, it shouldn't be a boundary that you violate by accident, and it shouldn't be a situation where you find yourself defending your own ignorance as the reason why you've done that, and that often happens. So let's avoid it. Let's talk about it. I'm gonna have a sip of my coffee first. To begin with, it's important for all of us to recognize that everybody participates in systems of power that create inequity. We all participate in systems of power that favor certain people over other people and that are designed to exploit some people for other people's benefit. Our entire society is built on them. Basic economics is nothing other than a way people who for people who have the right to do so to exploit people who don't have the right. And who has the right and who doesn't have the right basically is determined by who has the money and who doesn't have the money. That's economics. That's the foundation of all commerce. Okay? And those kinds of systems exist throughout our society, and in many cases we take them for granted. We don't really think about them. And it's certainly a lot easier not to think about them if you're benefiting from them. So those systems become habit. It's foolish to debate whether or not this is the case. We all just need to accept that it's a reality, and we all need to be conscious of these systems when we make our decisions. Representation is important because one of the ways that these systems perpetuate themselves is by refusing to show underprivileged people in positions of power. And one position of power that you can have is by being sort of the writer of your own story, by being your own protagonist, and by creating your own narrative. So the media has a knee jerk reaction to taking people who are, for example, disabled, or who are a person of color, or who may be gay or bisexual, or who may be transsexual, or who may have other identifying cultural factors that stigmatize them as somebody who shouldn't have power, and putting that character in the driver's seat of their own narrative. Okay? We all have knee jerk reactions to this. And when we make the decision to go ahead and push aside that knee jerk reaction and tell a story, the confusion that we're experiencing and the cultural sort of pressures that we feel can lead us to make obvious mistakes in misrepresenting those people. That's kind of what I want to talk about today, are the obvious mistakes that people of privilege tend to make when representing people who don't have privilege. Okay? And the first thing I want to talk about as we sort of pick this apart, and please step in and chat by all means, is that there's a difference between uh, representing a person and representing a culture. There's also a big difference between representing a person and representing a story. Okay? As people of privilege, whether you're white, whether you're male, whatever privileges you may have, you do not have the authority to tell the stories of people who are subjugated by your privilege, who don't have that privilege in common with you, and who maybe are on the receiving end of the power structure that you're benefiting from. You're blind to a lot of the things that are going on in those people's lives. It's true that you don't have the authority to go ahead and tell that story. As a white person, I would be remiss in telling a story about the black civil rights movement. I would also be remiss in telling a story about the colonization of the United States and the genocide of Native Americans. I have no business writing that narrative because, number one, I'm blind to a lot of the emotional realities that are created by those events, and also because I'm habitually lying to myself about maybe their severity or maybe who was involved. I will always have the impulse to create that good person who tried to make it right when it's irrelevant. That's not even the point of the story, right? It, I don't need to be telling that story. It's not my story to tell, and I'm even if I did it flawlessly, I would be taking the opportunity to tell that story away from someone who has more cultural authority to do so. I would be taking that story away from a native community or a black community who could have benefited from doing it. Even if I did it perfectly, I would still be denying someone their own heritage and laying claim to it in their place, and that's wrong. Okay? I have no business telling that story. So does that mean I can't tell stories about black people? Does that mean I can't tell stories about native people? No, that's ridiculous. The problem that we have as white content creators is that we automatically, if I want to tell a story about a black person, if I want to elevate black culture, well, I should tell a story about slavery. First of all, slavery is not the high point of black excellence, right? It's not. it's 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 the most victimized and oppressed a people can be. That is not that is not celebrating anything, right? It's not helpful. It's actually very destructive to keep hammering home in the public media and in the public eye that this is how the United States sees black people, especially for a white person to create that story, is to say to, so many black Americans, this is how we see you, when there's a million different ways we could be seeing people. And this story has been sold so many times already. And again, we don't have the cultural authority. But we can tell the story of a black person running for president. We could tell the story of a native person trying to trying to get to space. We can tell literally any story except for the stories that are intrinsic to the realities of the power structures that oppress these people in the first place. As long as we don't try to tell a story, quote unquote, about racism or about sexism, we're in a very good place to create representation. Okay, Ippy Looney's up. Good morning, Ippy Looney. We're doing Rangers Roost. It's Monday morning. It's when I sit down on Monday mornings and I talk with whoever's online, which right now is just myself and whoever happens to catch this later, about what's going on in geek culture and what's going on with Jump Rangers. And cool, says Ippy Looney. Ippy Looney, for those who don't know, is the love of my life. And also a voice actor who's going to be bringing some of our Jump Rangers characters to life as we expand the universe, and also one of the players of our Saturday metagame Jump Rangers game. Oh. Thank you, Ninja Robot. We have a new chat member. I appreciate it. So, well, that's nice to hear. Thank you very much. Obviously, it's always going to be tough when you bring up these kinds of issues, and I always expect a lot of resistance, but it's good to know that some of this stuff is sinking home. So, we don't want to appropriate the stories, we don't want to appropriate the culture, but we do want to elevate characters. One of the things to keep in mind as we tell stories about oppressed people, and by the way, racism, sexism, all the tools of oppression are going to wind up being themes in our story. It's fine, but we don't want to tell the story of how those themes came to be or how they came to be deconstructed. That's not our place, right? But if you tell the story of a black person running for president, for example, in film and in any kind of acting, stories are defined by the efforts of our characters to accomplish goals. Actors perform actions. This character is running for president. It's how they run for president. That's the plot. It's their efforts to achieve this goal that dictate the story, right? Well, it's, maybe in a novel that's more the case, but in specifically, let's say a film, if this character is running for president, then you have another or multiple characters who are also running for president in opposition to this character. Those characters, every character has to do their best to accomplish their goal in order for the conflict to be strong. Only one person gets to be president, so the conflict is created by the fact that you have these different characters trying all these different means of becoming president. If someone's running against a black person, racism is a tool that they have at their disposal. How they pursue their goal tells us who they are. They're going to use systems of power to try and accomplish their goal. Are they going to be conscious about it or unconscious about it? Or both at certain times? Do they know that they are exercising systems of oppression in order to make this other person's campaign harder? Or is it something that they're doing unconsciously because it just comes so easily and naturally to them? Who knows? The answer to that question is going to determine who this opponent is, and how they're really trying to accomplish their goal. And ultimately, the protagonist who's running for president is going to have to, overcome all of the extra ammunition coming their way and all of the additional challenges that are presented by this character's leveraging of their race against them. So it's just a story about two people running for office. You know, the themes are going to include racism because racism is a tool that characters have to use at their disposal. Now, there's a big difference between writing, and this is, by the way, exactly the reason why the book is always better than the movie. There's a huge difference between writing for literature and writing for film. Stories work differently in those two contexts. Like I said, writing for actors means you're writing in terms of action. It's the efforts of the characters. When we're writing literature, what we're really doing is making observations. And this is, again, a dangerous place to be because it's very easy to start making observations about racism, observations that we have no business making, right? But good journalism, good literature is about making observations, tying those observations together using theme into a narrative. Here's what this character experienced around this particular issue, for example. And they experienced this and this and this, and it changed them in these and these and these ways. That's a story. And then we create tension on the page for readers by juxtaposing those themes against each other. So, for example, maybe and a story that you're writing in literature that is dealing with representation can come at racism sideways, for example, by having themes of duty and honor, familial heritage, right, against themes of the greater good and and open-minded progress. And if you allow those two themes to coexist uncomfortably on the page, you're going to boil racism to the surface. It's going to happen. And ultimately, if a character so these observations, how this character is dealing with the sort of dichotomy of these pressures in their life, that's literature. And how that gets resolved is what keeps the reader reading. The fact that those two forces, the sense of duty and honor on the one hand, and then the sense of public interest on the other, and how they're not the same and how they don't coexist as well as you might think. That imbalance and how the writer is going to resolve that imbalance is what keeps the reader reading. They get curious about where that instability is going to lead, and so they turn pages to sort of resolve that, to scratch that itch, right? The reason why these stories, just to touch on it briefly, don't always translate well to the screen is because, going back to film, an audience doesn't want our observations. Because, and that sounds, I know, it sounds like I'm talking semantics, okay? But I'm not. They don't want our observations because they come to watch. They want to make their own observations. So, what do people watch? They watch another person doing something they have no business doing. That's what people watch. So, to create a good story on film, you kind of have to turn literature inside out. You have to say, what was this, instead of what happened to this character and how did they react, which is what we're observing, you have to ask, what did they do? How was the story their fault? What were they doing? And what could they have been trying to accomplish that led them through all of the things that they experienced, if indeed those things were all of their own making? And you tell the story of how they did what they did instead of how they dealt with the forces that were presented to them. It's a very different medium. And, you know, I mean, you can do this in a way that essentially recreates the same story, but with a very different narrative engine. A passive observer might see the same events and the same tone and the same sort of, even in many cases, the same words and say, oh, okay, well, you know, it's the same thing. But it's not. It's not. It's about what the characters did. A great adaptation, of course, is Lord of the Rings. The books are about the history that Frodo found himself in. But the movie's about Frodo taking the ring to Mount Doom. Fundamentally, it's a different narrative engine. So, you know, so when we going back to, you know, going back to representation and And appropriation. The place where that line exists, fundamentally, is the point where we stop simply giving characters an opportunity to own their own story, and we start telling the stories of oppressed cultures, or we start sort of hijacking their experiences. We don't have to do that. And the larger point that comes up with the other mistake that writers will make is when they say, okay, I'm not going to tell a story about the civil rights movement. I'm not going to do it. But I could tell a story about maybe a black person trying to become a doctor because it's so hard to become a doctor when you're black. And my point here is you're still hijacking the black experience. You don't need to lower the stakes of a story to the level of, well, you don't have to put training wheels on the goals of the protagonist. In other words, an actor defines their performance through their efforts to accomplish a goal, right? Would it be movie worthy if we told a story about a white doctor just trying to become a doctor? Just a white guy trying to get into college and go to medical school so that he can get a medical license and work at a hospital. Is that a feature film? No, it's not. And the reason why is because that goal is not so overwhelmingly challenging that it's going to force that character to change, right? When a movie, in other words, an actor performs an action that's overwhelmingly challenging because it gives the story an arc when they do that. If the character begins the story more or less capable of accomplishing the thing that they're in the movie to accomplish, then there's really nowhere for them to go. But if they're trying to accomplish something that's completely out of their reach in fundamental ways, right? They have to change who they are. And that's where you get your structure from. Catharsis is for literature. Catharsis is all about here's how these forces change this character. As screenwriters, we don't actually combine forces to shape our characters. We let our characters shape themselves through their efforts to accomplish their goals. A character starts trying to accomplish this thing that's way out of their reach. They say, okay, but I'm going to pull it within my reach. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And they start investing in this unsustainable goal. The end of Act Two, when things get really horrible and their life implodes, that happens because they've been investing in something that's not sustainable. And it collapses in on them and it destroys everything they care about. And then they have to say, okay, but I can't give up. I have to do the thing. What's it going to take? It's going to take you letting go of your identity. You have to change who you think you are and become something brand new. And that's how you're going to give yourself the tools or the insight or the perspective to approach this from a completely different direction. Okay? And so if we give a black character a goal that's kind of whittled down because it shouldn't be accessible to them because they're black, then we are still making a story about observations. We're making observations about the black experience. We're saying black people can't be doctors. Watch this person try. Whereas if you let a character run for president, if you let a character pursue a goal that would be overwhelmingly challenging under any circumstances, or at least under other circumstances, goals can be overwhelmingly challenging for personal reasons. Sometimes becoming healthy, becoming a healthy person is an overwhelmingly challenging goal. You can make movies about therapy, oddly enough, much more realistically than you can about just someone going to college to become a doctor, right? And my point is, if you pick a goal that's overwhelmingly challenging for reasons that are totally independent of this person's place in the power structure, then they're still going to have to overcome that other opponent that they're running against. Racism is still going to be leveraged against them. The story doesn't have to be about racism for it to expose racism. And that's where you really get the complexity and the intimacy But that feels like truth at that point, you know? And just through my own experience as a disabled person, I will also say this is where almost every screenwriter gets disability wrong. Ipuluni's agreeing with me. I like it. Ipuluni's trying on some clothes. So, you know, for example, you have a character with cognitive disabilities, and you say, well, this person's trying to get a college degree. It's not it's not reasonable to think that getting a college degree is an overwhelmingly challenging goal if someone is pursuing that, right? There's going to be a way to make that happen. It's a false sense of inspiration that you're trying to give people. You're just showcasing the trauma of disabled people to try and make able-bodied people feel good about themselves. Oh, look, they did a thing that's kind of like your life. Isn't that cute? No. You have to ask yourself, why is this character trying to get this college degree? What are they trying to accomplish? Are they trying to become a professional in some field? And if they are trying to become a professional in that field, why? What are they trying to contribute? What are they trying to do that is overwhelmingly challenging? What are they using the degree as a tool for? Have the follow through and see that bigger picture of what they're trying to accomplish and write the story about that. Because, if this if this person with cognitive disabilities is trying to get a college degree because they want to become an attorney and reform how Social Security views disability or something. That's a much bigger picture. That's a much bigger challenge. And it's something that even, even for example, disability attorneys have given up on. You have this one person who's like, well, I'm not going to give up. And everybody's like, yeah, but you're in our word. You can't do that. then then they're going to have a much bigger hill to climb, even than the people who have been crushed by the weight of that goal just through their own complacency. That becomes a story that empowers disabled people as opposed to just a story that inspires able-bodied people. And these stories that inspire. Ipiluni brings up the point that it's called inspiration porn. Disabled community actually has a word for this kind of stuff, and the same problems exist. The same problems exist for Black people in the media. We shortchange the goals of Black characters in order to make white people feel good about how much progress has been achieved, instead of challenging us to look at what's possible and to consider the meaning of true equity. And as content creators, as the media, we have to be the ones to imagine that. We have to be the ones. No one else is going to show people a picture of what actual freedom looks like or what actual unity looks like or what actual equity and fairness and justice look like. No one's going to show people that but us, right? Especially in the United States of America. One of the things that I love, for example, about Persian culture is that they embrace oratory as an art form. In Persian culture, there are public speakers. Iranians have public speakers that are celebrated, that are actually celebrities who go and talk about important things and feelings in front of audiences, that share ideas in beautiful ways. It's interesting. We don't have that. The Greeks had it, the Romans had it. It was part of politics, it was a skill. If you were an entertainer, you had to know how to do it. If you were a politician, you had to know how to do it. Here, Looney says everybody does it, which is true. It's true to an extent, but it's not an art form. You don't pay for it. It's not well done. It's not well done. So, who is going to challenge people to see a better future? It has to be the entertainment community. No one else is combining the articulation and the imagination. Oh, that looks great, sweetie. That looks really nice. So, you know, it's important that we do challenge ourselves to embrace representation. Every opportunity, anytime you write a character, ask yourself, does this person have to be white? Do they have to be able-bodied? And I'm not even saying like look at the plot and see if a disabled person can fit into that plot. I'm saying, from a screenwriting standpoint, what's the goal of the character? How much more challenging would it be if it was a disabled person trying to accomplish that goal or a black person trying to accomplish that goal? And wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't it be more impressive? Wouldn't it be? So even if it's an action film and there's lots of running, what if this person couldn't run? And I'm not saying like don't be gimmicky about it. Don't create a situation where a person in a wheelchair is in a chase film necessarily. Because it's not about what the character's running from, it's what they're running towards. What are they trying to achieve? What is this person who's running around blowing things up trying to accomplish? How would a disabled person accomplish that? Isn't that a better movie? Right? And we have to ask ourselves the very same questions about black characters. We have to ask ourselves the very same questions about native characters and Hispanic characters and and gay characters and trans characters and anybody who's underrepresented. Why aren't they in this movie? And as kind of a final point, I appreciate the effort that has been made in the Hollywood community to portray underrepresented people in supporting roles or even in leading roles in passive storytelling, but it's not cutting it. When it comes to film, stories are about the efforts of our characters to accomplish goals. So it's not enough to put a character in a situation and say, well, this person's black, here they are on the screen. Because that's not what's empowering about cinema to begin with. The magic of cinema is tied up in the fact that we're watching characters transform themselves through their efforts to accomplish goals. That's the transformative thing. And that's what's inspiring. Even if a story is a tragedy, even if it's Dr. Frankenstein, he pursues his goal to the point where it's no longer possible. And then he reinvents himself. And in his case, he turns himself into a monster to go even further. And this is why watching movies, even when they have sad endings or terrible endings, why there's something sort of inspirational about the medium. It's because characters are transforming themselves to do something they were previously incapable of doing. There's something superhuman about people in this respect, and good cinema always highlights that. And it reminds us that we're all capable of it. But that only takes hold if we're telling the story about someone who's trying to accomplish a goal that was out of reach to begin with. It's not enough to throw us and actors should always be given strong action. Supporting characters should be active too. They should be the kind of hero of their own story and not just there to give the protagonist some kind of information about X and Y and Z. But ultimately, we want underrepresented people defining the stories that we share as a culture through their efforts to accomplish A or B or C. And the truth is, we are going to meet with resistance. You are going to see like viral and foul efforts on the part of people who are invested in power structures to undermine these efforts. You are going to see the underbelly of the internet rise up against films like Captain Marvel and Black Panther. It's guaranteed to happen. We've seen how geek culture, and this is a terrifying prospect. But remember Gamergate. Geek culture and aspects of geek culture are the template, the actual playbook for modern fascism and for contemporary Nazism in the United States of America. I mean, the FBI will tell you this is the case. Ninja, I'm going to say yes and no. Because what we have to remember is that the executives of major media corporations are also participants, even if they're trying their best to do good things. For example, the people at Marvel, right? And they see the hate for the actors who are performing these roles. They see the hate for the actors in Star Wars at Disney. And some of these people get scared. Hate and violence, first of all, hate and violence are not just publicity. Hate and violence are crimes, and they are um, attacks. So it's reductive to call these movements publicity, first of all, and to think that they don't have an effect on the decisions that get made by white male executives who very easily can rationalize backing away from this kind of content. Look at what's happened with Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers is run by conservative political operators right now. The people in charge of Warner Brothers Studios, it's not, and it's destructive to the culture. And my point is, we as content creators can't afford to run from it. It takes courage to be um, to be a positive force of change, especially when there is so much hate and there is so much danger and risk out there. And if and I'm not looking you up on the internet right now, Ninja. I have no idea what your background is. I myself am disabled, but my disability is now invisible. Um, I have a number of experiences with the other side of privilege that a lot of people who are more obviously disenfranchised get shocked by. But at the same time, I have a huge amount of privilege in how I present to society. That privilege is also a tool, and it's a weapon. And if I'm not willing to take the benefit of my experience and the benefit of my privilege and put them together and turn them into uh, a more stable movement and a more stable force of change, something to shield other people and give them a safe place. And for me, that's what Jump Rangers is. It's a place for people to play that's safe and empowering. I want kids to know at the end of the day that they've got it right, that the observations that they're making about the world and the problems that they see are real, and that they have the power to change them. That's what Jump Rangers is really about. And ultimately, for me, I have to be the one willing to take on the Gamer Gators. I have to be the wall. And if we are white as writers, or if we are male, or if we do have aspects to our visible identities that give us more power to confront, hate, and maybe less consequence for doing so than someone in a weaker position, socially speaking, would have, then we have to do it. So, the reason I'm saying this isn't because it's not a complex issue. I just don't want people telling themselves, well, it's not going to be that hard. I bet there was a conversation in the beginning. Oh, people will go for it with with Captain Marvel, with this, and with the. I mean, we've got Echo on, and they're cutting shows at Marvel right now, right? We're not seeing as much production as we were. Is Echo going to get a season 2? Is the is the Choctaw lady with one leg going to get a lot more storytelling? Probably not. Probably not. They're going to go for more accessible demographics, And meanwhile, we're going to see Warner Brothers. I mean, they cut Batwoman. They cut a movie about a black female superhero, the first of its kind, in exchange for what? What did they get out of that? They cut it after production. That movie was 80% finished. They'd already spent the money. But they were programming themselves as the anti-Disney because in their view, Disney wasn't doing enough to serve the gamer gators. They wanted to bring in those eyeballs. They cut the movie as a show of good faith to the haters. So, absolutely, like anyone telling themselves, "Oh, it'll be a little rough for a minute. I'll get some glitches, but ultimately the press will serve me." Not necessarily. It can bury us if we're not mentally prepared for the fight. Because these guys are not playing around. These guys absolutely, unequivocally, and this is hard to say, but they want a white supremacist nation. They want women in the fucking kitchen. That's my one F bomb. They want to take away the right to vote. And yep. And so when we look at where things are today and we look at the movements that are taking place, it's not enough to see them as a reaction to something that people see as threatening. We have to look at it in terms of a larger goalpost. We have to look at it in terms of a progression and where we are in that progression and the momentum that we're experiencing as a society. Where is this going? How fast is it going there? Because it's not enough to weather the storm of the reaction to what we're doing. We have to be willing to grab the sails. Bigger problem that we're ignoring rather than thinking short term. They don't realize the long term damage. That's a big part of it. Exactly. 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 And so as we write our own content, as we build our own media, as we engage audiences, and as we start talking to people about these kinds of issues, the real trick is being able to grab the helm of our own ship and steer it where we want to go in the storm. Do not underestimate the current or the waves or the wind. Right? Plan for it. Have a plan and know that what you're doing is good enough and strong enough that it's worth it. Yeah, there we go. Let's see what we got here. As well, using the big tentpole items, we're losing stuff from indies. Well, that's an interesting conversation. It is a problem, um, but it's not a problem that the studios are built to solve. It is a failure in the studio system that the studio system is not equipped to avoid. And I will talk about that at a later time because today kind of belongs to basically our role as allies and our ability to elevate black voices, our ability to offer representation without appropriation. That's today, right? But in a lot of ways, what we're talking about here is film finance. And it's an area where I do have some experience. And I think that, fundamentally, when you look at the history of Hollywood, independent content and independent content producers come in waves. 15 years ago or so, we saw the creation of Summit. We saw Lionsgate kind of explode onto the fore. We saw a number of independent movie studios rise up to answer certain market forces and to generate independent content. And I think we need to see it's not going to happen through the studio system. Reversing that trend is absolutely not going to happen through the studio system. So there's demand for it, and the question is there financing and is there money for it? And that's a big part of the reason why I'm working on Jump Rangers, is because I don't have a better answer to that question other than to build my own audience and put the content out there. Right now, I think the way people look at media is primarily in terms of intellectual property. Story is always king, but right now people are very excited by world building. And so what everybody's going to tell you is get the comic published, get the novel published, and then we'll talk. But the publishing industry is going to tell you, why don't you get the screenplay finished? Why don't you get some packaging around the movie, and then we'll talk about the book. So where do you go, right? What do you do with that? And I think it's smart for content creators today, and it's hard, very challenging, but it's wise to develop excellent work in collaboration with your audience. I think that you know when you have something good going on, people are going to want to be a part of it, and making that happen through social media is extremely challenging. But the audience is more accessible than they've ever been because of social media. So you have to find a way to take advantage of that. You have to. Otherwise, look, I'll put it to you this way: it takes two things to be successful in show business: strengthen your craft and strengthen your community. That's strengthen my community, Fergus. So, you know, if your work is always excellent and the house is always full, you don't have any problems. But how do you become necessary to your community? How do you build a strong community? It's by being necessary to them. If people need you, they show up for you. Oh, of course. But the more work you put in, the more time you put in, the luck is going to happen eventually. You need to give the luck an environment where it has impact, right? And then there's the simple truth of the more shots you take, right? The more, I mean, you miss every shot you don't take. It's a numbers game to some degree. So that luck element, you want to turn that just into another statistic if you can. Okay, 3% of the time I'm going to get really lucky. But where does that luck go? What happens to it once it gets here? But so number one, you need to get that 3% up. You need to, if you put in 300 individual units of effort every day, then you nailed three of them. And then maybe you can move that luck. Maybe you can make it 5%. All of those things become extremely relevant in terms of how you're building a career. And that's the only way in which building a career in the entertainment industry is sustainable, is by controlling the things you can control. Anyway. uh so let's see. It's getting on. I think it's about time for some closing remarks on this. Do you have any questions, Ninja, while you're on? Is there anything I'm grateful that you logged in. Thank you for having a conversation with me. This has been great. I appreciate having you here. Um, it is absolutely our responsibility as white men to, if and I say this to the larger audience. I don't know if you're a white man or not, Ninja, but it's our responsibility to affect the changes in our culture and in our power structures that make room for equity and for everyone to succeed on the strength of their work. And as screenwriters, we are quite literally the leaders of the development process. We're the first person there. We are the people who create the template for the film that's being made. So we have to be the ones to create representation. And the way to do that is not by shaping stories around the cultural experiences or the needs of underprivileged people. Because we don't have the authority to tell those stories, and because we don't actually know what those needs are to begin with. What we can do is just take the stories that we think are so compelling, take the stories that we have an interest in telling in the first place, and give those stories. Give them to underprivileged actors, to black actors, to other people of color, to women, to people of other genders, to disabled people. Creating equity means taking the stories that we think we're entitled to and letting them go. That's probably a pretty awesome place to end it. Ninja, thank you very much for signing in. Thank you for the follow. It's a pleasure to have you here. Um, we do weekly readings of Jump Rangers content that I'm developing, and we also do a game on Saturdays. I'm going to try and get the readings are on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific. The game is at 2:30 p.m. on Saturday. I'm going to try and get one more gaming stream going per week as well. I do stream Star Citizen. If you're interested, you can find me at Tekker10 as well. TEKKERTEN. And thank you for being here. I'll see you Thursday if you show up. Don't be a stranger, Ranger.